In the pending New Mexico OSHA matter, is the RUST production company using an independent contractor argument as a way to avoid potential liability for the shooting on set? So welcome back to LabLV and our long crime content. Today is part 2 of our RUST OSHA series. In my first video, I went over the New Mexico OSHA agency's complaint, and today I'm going to go over the main legal arguments I see from the production company's answer. Now again, although this is not legal advice and is just my opinion, I did find some interesting things to share. So, as an overall theme in sum, I think it appears to me in the pleading that Rust Movie Productions is trying its hardest to distance itself from the actions that led up to the tragic accident. So that's my takeaway. So let's go ahead and go through the complaint or the answer. So first off, right away on page 2, I found it interesting the way they describe the legal entity. So what they're saying here is that the Rust production company created what's called a special purpose entity that was formed for a particular purpose. So it is true, there are special purpose legal entities that are formed for lots of different reasons. Sometimes it may be for a specific business, it might be for a project, there may be tax reasons, etc. But I thought what was interesting here, when you see how they go through and specify the very special things that they are doing. To me, what this seems like is that they're trying to show this is different. We're a special purpose entity. We're not a regular company. We're not a regular employer. That's what I think is trying to go, what I think the message and the kind of picture that they're painting here is to kind of emphasizing all that. So I thought that was interesting. And then we go on to page 4. And this is where they're talking about, so before the agency finalized their report and then issued their citations, they had a final conference. And at that conference, apparently one of the producers, this Mr. Ryan Smith, was in attendance. So here they're denying that Ryan Smith is a, quote, representative of the employer. And then they talk about how he just set up the entity. He's kind of the money person. He wasn't there day to day. And so therefore he's just the money person. Again, I think, well, first of all, I don't think that that's even really necessarily going to be a winning argument, because that would be trying to say, well, I own a business and I have a silent partner. So they're the money person, right? And I run the business on a day-to-day basis. And something goes wrong in the course of that business. That would be like the silent investor saying, well, I'm not responsible for that. I'm just the silent investor. You, day-to-day person. Now, if you're together in a legal entity, those owners of that business, from the outside, would be equally responsible. Now, they may internally have different ways in their agreements with their when they form the entity as to who's going to indemnify each other. That I have no idea. Of course, we haven't seen any of that. But with respect to the outside world, there's no difference. A producer is an owner. It's an owner. So I'm not quite sure, other than to say possibly, again, this idea that it's different. We're not a day-to-day. This is special. Again, I think it's a non-argument. I also think it's interesting because presumably Rust Productions chose to send Ryan. So why wasn't the line producer there, So in any event, she was at the other one. So the first meeting. So in any event, I think it's a non-argument. So then on page 5 here. Now we're on page 5, and I think this is really the key to this argument here, where they say right here, as stated above, RMP, Rust Movie Productions, did not have officers, directors, or employees. So they just didn't have any employees? So what was it then? Like, who's running the show? We'll see who they say who's running the show. But they also deny the allegation that Ms. Pickle, as a line producer, directly hired people. I'm not sure. But the kicker is that they are claiming that everybody is an independent contractor. And this is where I think it gets to the heart of the matter. And what we'll see in following sections of the answer is that we didn't have employees. RMP didn't have any employees. We didn't have managers. We didn't have anything. We just engaged a bunch of independent contractors. So what I'm seeing here is that they're alleging everybody on that set was an independent contractor. Now, again, this is not legal advice, but this raises a major issue that is really prevalent today in employment law, in tax law, in health and safety laws. This idea that if someone's an employee, they generally get protections under those statutes. And sometimes even independent contractors will be protected under those statutes as well, by the way. But, there's definitely, arguments as to whether, someone's an actual full employee. And so what is becoming very prevalent in most of these areas, now again, employment law may have a different test than tax law, etc. But generally, all of these laws in these different areas, when you're trying to consider if someone's an employee versus an independent contractor, are going to look to substance over form. So you can call them an independent contractor all you want and put that in the contract, but if in substance, that's your form, but in substance, if what's going on day to day is an employer-employee relationship, a subordinate relationship, substance is going to win. So again, and there's different factors, as I mentioned, but one thing that is kind of thematic through a lot of these laws is the amount of direction and control that the entity that engaged the contractor had over that contractor. So to be a true independent contractor, you truly have to be your own boss. You get to choose your hours. You get to choose all of this, how you do your work. There's very little supervision or really force of how the engaging entity dictates how you do your thing. So, and a lot of states have different laws. What's interesting is California has some of the strictest laws in the country on the classification of an independent contractor versus an employee. I don't know if anyone's been read, in the past few years, all of the controversy with the Uber and the Lyft cases and how in California those people would meet the test of an employee. Even if they're an Uber driver and they just decide when they want to pick up, a fare, etc. So this is a big issue. And so it's very interesting to me as a practitioner, that argument being the argument to make. And maybe that's the argument they could make. So in any event, again, not legal advice, but I just found that very interesting. And here's a little bit more of that argument. So right here it says RMP is a production company. As such, its responsibility in connection with the making of Rust, the movie, is limited to financing, hiring talent, hiring and contracting with independent contractors, experts in their fields. We're not experts, and therefore we rely on engaging all of them, and what they're seemingly arguing here is that we're just not responsible. We engage those independent contractors, that's their thing, and we don't have any responsibility. We're just the production company. That's, again, how I'm reading this. I thought was interesting here is, again, the argument that these are independent contractors, we're just the production company. But they did engage those independent contractors. And I think to kind of counteract that argument, it's like that there was some negligence in who you chose. Here they're talking about Ms. Reed, and they say, although she doesn't have a lengthy track record, she came highly recommended by these individuals, plus her dad is this famous armorer. So therefore, that kind of is there to say, well, we weren't negligent, even if that was to come up. So that's where I think what's going on there. But I think, again, on page 12, actually. Okay, Okay, and so here down in paragraph 39 is where I think we really get to this central argument that the defense is making here. They're basically denying certain things that the complaint contained within it, where Hannah was alleging that, she wasn't allowed to be in the room, and she was not the one that actually gave the firearm to Mr. Baldwin. And so what they say here, they further respond that regardless of what she says and her impressions or belief, she was a specialized independent contractor singularly responsible for all tasks associated with the use of firearms and ammunition in connection with the production of rust, including but not limited to. This is a bunch of stuff. So basically they're saying she is it. She is a singularly responsible for everything. I mean, of course she's responsible. She's the armor. But that doesn't mean that just because you engage in armor, you can wipe your hands of everything and then no one else has to be responsible for any safety. I mean, that doesn't even go along with the safety procedures that were contained in the complaint that RUST was using. And those fire gun safety is everybody's problem, everybody's concern, So again, I think this idea that it's not us, we engaged an independent contractor that was known to be, a good person in the industry, and it was singularly her responsibility to take care of all tasks associated with the use of firearms and ammunition on set. I don't think that's going to be a winning argument. Here, this paragraph 47, I think, is also interesting. I mean, it has the typical denials and etc. But what I thought was interesting is that one of the allegations that was in the complaint was that Hannah apparently had tried to schedule to gun train the stunt crew. And she was told, allegedly, that the stunt coordinator would handle all that. And so their response is that the stunt crew were allegedly trained, and that was by an independent contractor. So therefore, there's no problems here. No problems, But then they go on to say in the same paragraph, again, that Hannah was singularly responsible for all tasks with the use of firearms. So I'm kind of confused. Is it Hannah's responsible for everything? Or is Hannah responsible for everything, but okay, the stunt crew, that's okay? I feel like it feels to me, my opinion, it's talking out of both sides of the mouth. I just don't think, it seems like they're trying to have it both ways. And then finally, to kind of finalize this point, we can see at the very end their affirmative defenses. At this point, we can see here in their affirmative defenses that they're going to try to rely on this independent contractor and this idea of a multi-employer work site, which I presume they're going to try to argue that each department was its own employer and that the production company was therefore not responsible for the actions of those other mini employers. They just were responsible for bringing in the experts, and then they all have their mini situations, and we're just the money people up here. Again, not legal advice, but remember, substance over form. And also, generally speaking, a main contractor, even if this was a contractor relationship, a main contractor is not generally relieved of its overall responsibility of providing a safe workplace for work to be performed under that subcontract and by those subcontractors. So I just don't think it's a winning argument. But again, they probably brought these affirmative defenses because in most jurisdictions, many of these types of defenses need to be made in the responsive pleading or they're waived. So my assumption is they included in here because they're being thorough, as they should be. But in any event, whether those are going to go anywhere, we don't know. And as a final point, as I mentioned in my prior video on the complaint, we heard on January 19th, of course, the prosecutors, which is separate, criminal, that's when they announced that they were going to be bringing involuntary manslaughter charges against Alec Baldwin and Ms. Reed, the armorer. And they also, on that same day, in this matter, we learned that the parties were re-engaging in settlement discussions, and they expected them to be fruitful. So we'll see. I'll keep everyone updated, but thank you again for joining. If you would consider liking and subscribing, that would be great. And if not, I look forward to seeing you in my next one. Thanks so much. Bye.